I am Chloe, 32 years old, and I was supposed to be the invisible sister at my own sister's luxury engagement party. When her wealthy white fiancé spilled wine on his shoe, he looked right at me, smirked and barked an order in Mandarin telling me to get on my knees and clean it up before he had me fired. My parents and my sister just giggled into their champagne. I did not cry and I did not shrink away. I paused, picked up a linen napkin, and replied in flawless aristocratic Mandarin, casually destroying his entire business pitch in front of his foreign investors. The room fell dead silent, and his face turned pale. Before I tell you how this one moment unraveled a massive financial fraud and destroyed my toxic family's social standing forever, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family exactly who they are messing with. Growing up in Atlanta, high society was a game my parents played with terrifying dedication. My mother Valerie and my father Terrence were obsessed with ascending the ranks of the city's black elite. They measured human worth in exclusive country club memberships, designer labels heavily plastered with logos, and strategic marriages that could elevate their social standing. My younger sister Jada was their golden ticket. Beautiful, compliant, and completely devoid of any ambition that did not involve spending someone else's money, she was the perfect vessel for their aspirations. I was the opposite. I was the dark cloud on their perfectly curated horizon. When I refused to play their game of appearances, they cut me off entirely at 18. I paid my own way through Georgetown by working 3 night shifts, mastering 5 languages, and quietly building a corporate intelligence and linguistic risk assessment firm that operated on a global scale. My family knew absolutely none of this. To them, my unbranded clothing and quiet demeanor meant I was a struggling failure who had wasted her life. Tonight was supposed to be Jada's crowning achievement. She was officially getting engaged to Preston, a tech logistics CEO who was allegedly worth billions. The engagement party was held at one of the most exclusive and rigidly traditional country clubs in Atlanta. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm glow over floral arrangements that probably cost more than my first car. The room buzzed with the sound of clinking champagne flutes and the forced, breathless laughter of people desperate to network. I had been invited purely as a prop, a visual reminder of Jada's superiority. They shoved me at a cramped table in the very back, right next to the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter rushed past with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, my chair was bumped. I sat there in my sleek, tailored black dress. It had no visible labels, but the fabric and the structural cuts spoke of quiet, immense wealth. Of course, my family could not read the signs. They only understood loud money. Preston was working the room like a politician desperate for votes. He was trying to secure a massive merger with a group of Shanghai-based investors who had flown in just for the occasion. The lead investor, Mr. Lin, was a man whose reputation preceded him in the international corporate circles I ran in. He was a ruthless, brilliant strategist who did not suffer fools gladly. I watched Preston corner Mr. Lin near the center of the room, loudly pitching his supply chain software while butchering the basic cultural nuances of a professional business exchange. Preston's arrogance practically radiated off him in waves. He gestured wildly with his wine glass, and in his careless, boastful enthusiasm, a dark splash of Cabernet landed directly on the toe of his custom Italian leather shoe. Preston stopped mid-sentence, his face flushed with sudden irritation. He looked around for a scapegoat, and his eyes landed on me sitting quietly at the back table. In his narrow mind, a black woman sitting near the kitchen in a plain dark dress could only be venue staff. He marched over to my table, Mr. Lin and the other executives trailing slightly behind him out of sheer curiosity. Jada, Valerie, and Terrence hurried over as well, eager to see Preston exert his authority and command the room. Preston stopped right in front of me, pointed at his stained shoe, and smirked. Then he opened his mouth and spoke in what he clearly thought was impressive fluent Mandarin. He called me a clumsy maid and ordered me to get on my knees and scrub the wine off his shoe before he had me fired and thrown out on the street. I saw my mother cover her mouth to hide a delighted laugh. Jada leaned heavily against Terrence, giggling into her expensive crystal glass. They did not understand the language, but they understood the harsh, degrading tone. They understood the public humiliation. They watched me fully expecting me to cower, to apologize profusely, or to run out of the venue in tears. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, and they were thrilling in the idea that Preston was doing it for them in front of an international audience. I looked at the dark red stain on his shoe, then slowly up at his smug, expectant face. The air in the room seemed to stand perfectly still. The music from the string quartet faded into meaningless background noise. I did not blink. I did not flush with embarrassment. I slowly reached out and picked up a crisp white linen napkin from the table. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress with deliberate calmness. I stepped toward Preston, closing the physical distance between us until he had to look slightly up to meet my gaze. The smirk on his face widened, anticipating my total submission. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye and spoke. My Mandarin was not the clumsy textbook translation he had just stumbled through. It was flawless, aristocratic, and carried the absolute unyielding authority of a native corporate executive. I told him his shoe was the absolute least of his problems. I pointed out that his pitch to Mr. Lin was fundamentally flawed. I explained in rapid and precise financial terminology that his proposed software completely ignored the specific regional tariffs of the southern ports and failed to account for the catastrophic supply chain bottlenecks currently choking Savannah. I added that any investor foolish enough to back a logistics model with such glaring domestic blind spots would be throwing $500 million into an incinerator. The linguistic precision sliced through the heavy, humid atmosphere of the room like a blade. Mr. Lin froze. The two executives standing behind him widened their eyes in sheer, unfiltered shock. Then a booming laugh erupted from Mr. Lin. It was genuine, deep, and entirely at Preston's expense. The other investors immediately joined in their amusement, echoing through the otherwise silent country club. Preston's face drained of all color. The smug arrogance melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He realized instantly that not only had I understood his degrading insult, but I had just dismantled his entire business model in less than 10 seconds, exposing him as an incompetent fraud in front of the exact people he desperately needed to impress. He stood there, mouth opening and closing without sound, looking entirely helpless. The power dynamic had shifted so violently and so quickly that the rest of the room could barely process it. Jada's giggles died in her throat. She slammed her champagne glass onto a passing waiter's tray with a sharp, angry clink. She stomped her foot, her carefully curated elegance shattering completely. She screeched that I was intentionally ruining her perfect night, that I was a jealous, bitter woman trying to steal the spotlight on her engagement day. She demanded to know what I had said to make the foreign investors laugh at her future husband. I ignored my sister's tantrum completely. My focus remained strictly on the men who actually held real power in the room. Mr. Lin stepped elegantly around a paralyzed Preston, completely disregarding the man who was supposed to be the guest of honor. He approached me with a respectful nod, the kind of subtle bow reserved for esteemed high-ranking colleagues. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a gold-embossed business card, offering it to me with both hands. He spoke to me in Mandarin again. His tone completely shifted from the polite boredom he had previously shown Preston. He asked for my professional opinion on the Atlanta logistics market and inquired if my firm was currently accepting new consultation contracts. I accepted the card with equal grace, handing him one of my own sleek, minimalist obsidian cards in return. I replied that my schedule was highly selective, but I always made time for astute and serious inquiries. We conversed easily, exchanging high-level market analyses, as if we were sitting in a private executive boardroom in Shanghai, rather than a decorated ballroom in Atlanta. We left Preston sweating profusely, his breath shallow as he watched his $500 million lifeline casually networking with the sister he had just tried to treat like dirt. The humiliation radiating from Preston was a physical presence in the room. He looked physically ill, his hands shaking visibly at his sides. Terrence could not handle the massive shift in the room's gravity. The idea of me commanding deep respect from wealthy investors while his golden son-in-law was made a public laughingstock was too much for his fragile status-obsessed ego to bear. My father stormed over, his face twisted in an ugly scowl. He grabbed my arm roughly, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. He tried to physically pull me away from Mr. Lin and the executives. He hissed under his breath, his words a venomous whisper, meant only for me. He accused me of trying to embarrass the family in front of important white folks, of deliberately sabotaging Jada's happiness, because I was a miserable failure who had absolutely nothing of my own. The sheer audacity of his statement, the absolute blindness to reality, ignited a cold and steady fire in my chest. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, then up at his furious face. I did not raise my voice, but the danger in my tone was unmistakable. I yanked my arm free with a sharp, forceful movement that made him stumble back a half step. I adjusted my sleeve, my eyes locked on his. The battle lines were no longer being drawn in secret. The polite fiction of our family was dead. I turned my back on the stunned investors and the trembling Preston, setting the stage for a private explosive showdown that would finally tear down the illusions my parents had spent their entire lives protecting. The heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge slammed shut behind me, cutting off the hum of the country club ballroom. My father, Terence, stood with his back pressed against the wood, as if guarding a prison cell. He was breathing hard, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles flickered under his skin. My mother, Valerie, immediately marched to the center of the plush room, dropping her designer clutch onto a glass table with a sharp thud. Jada trailed behind them, sobbing dramatically into her hands, her diamond engagement ring catching the dim, ambient light. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, adjusting the cuff of my tailored black dress, my heart rate completely steady. I had spent a lifetime fearing these people and their closed-door interrogations. I had spent my teenage years shrinking under their disapproving glares, desperately trying to earn a fraction of the love they showered on my sister. Today I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, analytical clarity. Valerie turned on me, her eyes wide with a frantic, manic energy. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice shrill and echoing off the soundproofed walls. "Have you lost your mind acting like a common street thug in front of those investors? You humiliated Preston in front of the entire country club. You humiliated this family." I looked at her manicured finger pointing inches from my face. "I did not humiliate anyone," I replied, my voice completely level. Preston embarrassed himself. He assumed a black woman sitting quietly in the back of the room was a maid and ordered me to scrub his shoes. I simply responded to his command in the language he chose to butcher. Terence pushed away from the door, his heavy footsteps thudding against the carpet. He pointed a thick finger at my chest. "You will march back out there right now and apologize to that man," he barked. "You will get on that stage, grab a microphone, and tell Mr. Lin and every single guest that you drank too much and misunderstood the situation. You will apologize to Preston for disrespecting your betters." The phrase hung in the air, toxic and heavy, disrespecting my betters. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that made my father flinch. "My betters," I echoed, stepping closer to him, so he had to look me directly in the eye. "A mediocre man running a fraudulent logistics company who cannot even string together a cohesive sentence in Mandarin is my better. A man who relies on his whiteness and a rented tuxedo to impress foreign billionaires who actually run the global market is my better. You are so blinded by your desperation to climb the Atlanta social ladder that you would rather watch your own daughter scrub wine off a racist man's shoe than admit he is a fool." Jada let out a loud wail from the corner, sinking dramatically onto a velvet sofa. "She ruined my engagement party." Jada sobbed, her voice muffled behind her hands. "She has been planning this. She has always hated me. She just wants to destroy my happiness because she is miserable and alone." Valerie rushed over to coddle her, wrapping her arms around Jada and glaring at me over my sister's shoulder. "See what you have done," Valerie hissed. "Your sister is practically having a panic attack. You have been holding on to this toxic, bitter energy since you were 18. You just could not stand seeing Jada get a billionaire fiancé while you have absolutely nothing to show for your life." Terence crossed his arms, nodding in agreement. "Your mother is right. You have been a spiteful, vindictive girl ever since we had to reallocate those college savings. You never let it go. You walk around with this arrogant chip on your shoulder, punishing us because we made a financial sacrifice for your sister's career." The sheer audacity of the word reallocate sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through my veins. I did not raise my voice, but every word I spoke landed like a hammer strike. Reallocate, I asked, tilting my head. You stole $40,000 from my savings account 2 weeks before my freshman year began. You drained the college fund my grandmother left me, so Jada could travel across the country losing beauty pageants and buying custom evening gowns. You told me I was resilient and would figure it out while you bought her a brand new car for coming in 5th place. Valerie stood up from the sofa, her face flushed with defensive rage. Jada had real potential in the pageant circuit. She needed investment to secure her future. We made a parental decision. And it worked, did it not? Look at the circles we run in now. Look at the man she is marrying. You were always book smart, Chloe. You did not need the money the way Jada needed the exposure. I stared at the woman who had birthed me, realizing just how deeply her delusion ran. She truly believed that sacrificing my education for Jada's vanity was a masterstroke of parenting. I worked 3 night shifts wiping down cafeteria tables and answering library phones to pay my way through Georgetown. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I slept 4 hours a night for 4 years. I taught myself corporate negotiation and international risk assessment, while the two of you ignored my calls because you were too busy hosting high tea at the country club. I built an entire life from the absolute bottom. And here Jada sits 30 years old, wearing a $50,000 dress, paid for by her fiancé, still maxing out your credit cards, because she has never worked a single day in her life. Do not ever speak to me about bitterness. I am not bitter. I am free. Jada stood up, her face streaked with ruined makeup, her fists clenched at her sides. You are just a jealous broke nobody, she screamed, her voice cracking. Preston is going to be the most powerful man in Atlanta after tonight. He is going to give me everything you will never have. He is a billionaire and you are just a freelance nobody who got lucky translating a few words. You think making him look bad changes anything? It just proves you belong exactly where we put you, in the back of the room near the kitchen. Terrence took another step toward me, his physical presence looming, trying to intimidate me into submission, the way he always did when I was a teenager. This conversation is over, he declared, his tone carrying the weight of a final verdict. You will fix this, Chloe. You will go back into that ballroom, you will find Mr. Lin, and you will tell him you fabricated that entire story about Preston's supply chain software. You will tell the investors that you made it up because you were jealous of your sister. You will fall on your sword for this family, or so help me God, you are no longer a part of it. I looked at my father, a man who was willing to destroy my professional reputation to save the fragile ego of his future white son-in-law. He was willing to sacrifice me entirely, just to maintain his proximity to perceived wealth and status. It was a tragic, pathetic display of submission. The threat of being kicked out of a family that had already abandoned me decades ago held absolutely zero weight. Before I could deliver my absolute refusal, the heavy brass handle of the oak door turned. The heavy wood groaned open, breaking the tension in the room like a gunshot. Preston walked into the VIP lounge. His bespoke tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, his tie slightly skewed. His face was blotchy red, a stark contrast to his normally composed pale complexion. He was sweating heavily, the confidence from earlier completely evaporated, replaced by a frantic, volatile anger. He slammed the door shut behind him, locking it with a sharp click. He did not look at Jada. He did not look at my parents. His bloodshot eyes locked entirely on me, his chest heaving as he prepared to deliver his threat. Preston did not bother with the charming billionaire facade he had been wearing all night. The polished Southern gentleman act was completely gone. He stalked toward me, the heavy soles of his shoes sinking into the thick carpet, his hands balled into tight fists. He looked like a man who was used to buying his way out of every inconvenience, and I was an inconvenience he could not afford. You think you are clever, he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage he was desperately trying to suppress. You think stringing together a few translated phrases makes you a business expert. You just embarrassed me in front of the most important men in my industry. I held my ground, not stepping back an inch. I did not translate phrases, Preston. I exposed a fundamental gap in your domestic routing strategy. If you cannot handle basic scrutiny, you should not be asking for $500 million. Preston sneered a nasty, ugly expression that twisted his features. He turned away from me and looked directly at my father. Terrence, you need to get your daughter in line right now. Because if she does not walk back into that ballroom and fix what she just broke. My capital management group is pulling every single cent out of your logistics company by tomorrow morning. Your entire fleet will be repossessed before noon. The color drained from my father's face so fast he looked physically ill. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. This was the dirty little secret my family had been hiding behind their country club memberships and designer clothes. My father's transport business was not thriving. It was bleeding out, and he had tied his entire financial survival to the white savior he was allowing to marry his youngest daughter. Preston was not just a future son-in-law, he was their life raft. Preston pointed a shaking finger at me, his attention snapping back. You are going to walk out there fine, Mr. Lin, and tell him you made the whole thing up. You are going to tell him you are just a bitter, jealous sister who wanted to ruin my pitch because you are upset about the wedding. You will tell him I am exactly the visionary I pitched myself to be. Jada saw her opening and immediately weaponized her tears. She threw herself against Preston, burying her face in his chest while glaring at me over his shoulder. She has always been like this. Jada wailed, her voice echoing perfectly off the lounge walls to maximize the victimhood. Ever since we were kids, Chloe could never stand to see me shine. She knows I am getting the fairy tale. She knows I am marrying a wealthy, successful man while she has absolutely nothing. She made up all those complicated logistics words just to sound smart and sabotage my engagement. She hates my happiness. Valerie rushed forward, her hands hovering nervously around Preston as if trying to soothe a wild animal. Preston, please do not do this. Do not pull your funding. We will handle her. We promise you we will handle her. Valerie turned her frantic, desperate eyes on me. Chloe, do you hear what you are doing? You are destroying your father's business. You are destroying your sister's future. Over what? Your stubborn pride. My father stepped between me and the door, cutting off my exit. His broad shoulders squared, his chest puffed out in a desperate attempt to assert the patriarchal authority he had long ago sold to the highest bidder. I looked at the man who had raised me, the man who had demanded perfection, but only rewarded obedience. He was willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood to protect the fragile ego of the man holding his purse strings. You heard him, my father barked, his voice laced with absolute panic. You are going to march back into that ballroom right now. You will find Mr. Lin and his associates and you will apologize. You will look them in the eye and admit that you are a jealous, petty woman who fabricated those supply chain errors to ruin your sister's night. You will beg Preston for forgiveness in front of them. I stared at my father, letting the sheer absurdity of his demand wash over me. You want me to publicly humiliate myself? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. You want me to lie to international investors and destroy my own professional credibility, just so this fraud of a man can secure funding he does not deserve. You want me to save a business you ran into the ground. I do not care about your imaginary credibility, Terrence roared, spittle flying from his lips. You are a dropout with no future. Preston is a billionaire. He is bringing generational wealth into this family. You will do exactly as you are told, or so help me God, you are dead to me. The room went entirely silent. Even Jada stopped her theatrical sobbing to watch the ultimatum land. My father took a step closer, his face inches from mine, his eyes burning with a desperate, pathetic fury. I mean it, Chloe. You either walk out there and fix this, or you walk out the back door of this club and you never contact us again. You will be permanently disinvited from the wedding. You will be cut out of our lives, our wills, and our family. You will have absolutely no one. Make your choice. They all stared at me. Valerie was holding her breath. Jada was clutching Preston's arm, a triumphant smirk breaking through her fake tears. Preston stood tall, his chest puffed out completely, certain that his wealth and my father's threats had backed me into an inescapable corner. In their minds, a broke single black woman with no family support would eventually break. They expected me to fold, to cry, to beg for my place back at their table, even if it meant sitting near the kitchen. I looked at the four of them, taking in the pathetic reality of the people I had spent my entire youth trying to please. I felt no sorrow. I felt no grief over losing a family that had only ever viewed me as a disposable asset. The invisible chain they had held around my neck snapped, disintegrating into absolute nothingness. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly reached over to the leather chair next to the door and picked up my tailored coat. "I will not apologize," I said, my voice ringing with absolute unshakable authority. "I will not lie to cover up the incompetence of a man who cannot even run a clean ledger. And I will certainly not beg for a place in a family that is drowning in its own delusion." I slipped my arms into my coat, adjusting the collar with meticulous care. I looked directly at my father, whose face was beginning to crumble as he realized his ultimatum had completely failed. "Consider me dead to you," I told him. "It is the best gift you have ever given me." I turned my back on my father and his ridiculous ultimatum. I walked toward the heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge with steady, measured steps. The thick carpet muted the sound of my heels, but the silence in the room was absolutely deafening. They genuinely expected me to freeze in place. They expected me to turn around, drop to my knees, and beg for forgiveness. They had spent over a decade conditioning me to believe that their approval was the only currency that mattered in this world. When my hand touched the cold brass handle of the door, my mother finally snapped. Valerie could not stand being ignored. It was the ultimate insult to her fragile ego. She took 2 quick, aggressive steps forward and hurled her final, desperate insult directly at my back. "You are walking away because you have absolutely nothing else to do," she sneered, her voice dripping with a venom so toxic it practically burned the air between us. "You are a broke, jealous spinster, Chloe. You live in a pathetic fantasy world where you think your little freelance translation gigs make you important. Look at Preston. Look at the life he is providing for your sister. You will never afford a lifestyle like his in a million years. You will spend the rest of your miserable life pressing your nose against the glass, wishing you had a fraction of what Jada has. You are leaving because you cannot handle being in the presence of real wealth." I stopped. I did not turn the brass handle. I let her bitter words hang in the air, letting the sheer absurdity of her arrogance settle over the room. I slowly turned around to face the 4 of them. Valerie had her chin raised high, looking incredibly smug and victorious. Jada was wiping her fake tears, waiting eagerly for me to run out of the room crying. Preston was glaring at me with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. I looked past all of them to the corner of the lounge. The country club manager, a nervous-looking older man named Thomas, had been quietly standing by the service station, trying his best to make himself invisible during our explosive family dispute. "Thomas," I called out, my voice cutting cleanly through the thick tension. "Bring me the master ledger for tonight. Bring me the entire catering and venue tab for this engagement party right now." Thomas blinked in sheer confusion. He looked nervously at Preston, and then at my parents, but he quickly scurried over to a small console table. He picked up the digital tablet containing the event invoices. "What do you think you are doing?" Terrence demanded, stepping forward with his chest puffed out. "You cannot afford a single appetizer in this building. Stop making a fool of yourself." I ignored my father completely and focused entirely on the club manager. "What is the outstanding balance for the food, the staff, and the private venue rental?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational and light. Thomas cleared his throat, sweating slightly under the intense scrutiny of the room. "The total for the evening is $40,000, miss. The initial deposit was paid, but the remaining balance is due by the end of the night." I reached into my sleek evening clutch and pulled out a solid metal card. It was not a standard credit card. It was a matte black obsidian corporate card issued exclusively to chief executives holding 8-figure international accounts. It had no spending limit and no identifying bank logos. It featured just my name deeply engraved in the heavy dark metal. I held it out to Thomas. "Run it for the full 40,000 right now," I instructed. "I want the itemized receipt printed immediately." My mother let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed in the small room. "What is that, a prepaid debit card you picked up at the local grocery store?" She mocked, her voice laced with absolute disdain. "Stop embarrassing yourself, Chloe. Put that plastic toy away. Preston is handling the bill tonight. He is a billionaire." Preston tightened his jaw, but he said absolutely nothing. He was watching the heavy metal card in my hand with an intense, unblinking focus. Thomas took the card from my fingers. His eyes widened significantly as he felt the heavy physical weight of the solid obsidian. He tapped it against the mobile payment terminal he carried. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft digital processing sound of the machine. My parents watched with smug expressions, waiting for the inevitable red screen of a declined transaction. They were waiting for my ultimate humiliation. The machine beeped brightly. Approved! A bright green light illuminated the dim corner of the room. Thomas stared at the screen in pure shock. He quickly printed a long paper receipt and handed it to me along with my heavy metal card. His hands were shaking slightly. "Thank you, miss," he whispered, stepping back against the wall with newfound reverence. I took the receipt, holding the long strip of paper delicately between my fingers. The room had gone completely silent again. The mocking smiles on my parents' faces had vanished instantly. Their smug superiority was replaced by pure, unadulterated confusion. My father stared at the portable credit card machine as if it had just performed magic. My mother looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. I walked slowly back toward the velvet sofa where Jada was sitting. She stared at the receipt in my hand as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike her. I stopped right in front of her. I looked down at her $50,000 designer dress. I looked at her massive diamond ring. I looked at the empty crystal champagne glass clutched in her trembling hand. Then I casually dropped the receipt directly onto her lap. "Consider it my wedding gift," I said, my voice carrying across the room with effortless, absolute authority. "You clearly needed the charity." Jada gasped, staring down at the $40,000 approval code resting on her expensive fabric. I did not wait for her response. I did not wait for my parents to find their voices or demand an explanation for how their discarded scapegoat daughter possessed that kind of liquid capital. I turned on my heel and walked straight out of the VIP lounge. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped out into the brightly lit hallway of the country club. I did not look back. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. I was leaving my mother and father staring in absolute stunned silence, unable to process how the daughter they threw away had just casually dropped an average annual salary on a single transaction without blinking. But as the heavy door swung shut behind me, I caught one last glimpse of Preston. I was not looking at the receipt on Jada's lap. He was looking directly at me. His face was no longer just angry or humiliated. The flush of embarrassment had faded into a cold, hard stare. His eyes had narrowed into a sharp, vindictive calculation. It was the absolute panic of a fraudster realizing he might have just picked a fight with someone who actually possessed the massive wealth and immense power he was only pretending to have. I walked down the carpeted hallway feeling lighter than I had in years. The battle lines were officially drawn, and I knew Preston was already plotting his revenge. But he had absolutely no idea what kind of war he was starting. 2 weeks passed in absolute silence. It was the kind of deep, quiet calm that always precedes a catastrophic storm. I spent those 14 days entirely immersed in global risk assessments for my international clients, completely ignoring the frantic, escalating missed calls from my parents. I knew they were panicking. The $40,000 receipt I had dropped on Jada's lap had shattered their reality, but their cognitive dissonance was too strong. Instead of realizing they had underestimated me, they convinced themselves I had simply maxed out fraudulent credit cards or taken out massive ruinous loans just to show off. They could not fathom a world where the daughter they discarded had outgrown their wildest financial dreams. The illusion of peace shattered on a Tuesday morning. My phone vibrated against the sleek glass of my conference table. It was a notification from the Hayes family group chat. I had never muted it, keeping it active strictly for intelligence gathering. I knew Preston would not just walk away after the humiliation he suffered at the country club. He was a man whose entire identity was built on dominating those he deemed inferior. I tapped the screen and read the message Preston had just sent to the entire family. "Just filed the paperwork. Hope your little translation gig has good liability insurance, Chloe. Actions have consequences. It is time you learned a lesson in real wealth and respect." A second later, Jada responded with a string of clapping hands and heart emojis. Valerie chimed in, immediately typing, "You brought this on yourself, Chloe. We are washing our hands of your mess." Terrence added the final predictable blow, sending, "You had your chance to apologize. Now you can pay the price." I set the phone down just as my building's private concierge called up to my penthouse. A process server was downstairs aggressively demanding access. I authorized security to let him into the private elevator. Minutes later, a thick, heavy stack of legal documents was slammed onto my desk. I carried the paperwork into my main living area, a sprawling, highly secure downtown loft that doubled as my private command center. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bustling Atlanta skyline, casting sharp morning light over my minimalist, custom-built furniture. Across from me sat Isaiah, my lead corporate counsel. Isaiah was a brilliant, ruthless litigator whom I kept on a massive retainer specifically to destroy corporate bullies. Isaiah picked up the stack of papers and began to read. His sharp eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, and within 3 minutes, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He actually laughed out loud, tossing the injunction request casually onto the glass table. "This is amateur hour," Isaiah said, tapping the front page. "He is suing your public-facing limited liability company for defamation and tortious interference with prospective economic advantage. He is officially claiming that you purposefully mistranslated his pitch to Mr. Lin and fabricated supply chain errors to sabotage his $500 million merger out of sheer vindictive jealousy." I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my arms. "He thinks I am just a low-level freelance translator who got lucky." "Exactly," Isaiah replied, flipping to the financial demands. "He assumes your LLC is just a tiny front you operate out of a local coffee shop. He is asking the court for $500,000 in punitive damages. He specifically notes in his filing that this amount will likely bankrupt your operation. He filed an emergency injunction to freeze your public business accounts pending the trial. He thinks he is cutting off your oxygen. He wants to starve you out, so you will be forced to sign a groveling settlement." I looked at the paperwork, marveling at the sheer blinding arrogance of a man who did not even run a basic corporate background check on his target before launching a legal strike. Preston had targeted a shell company I kept visible purely for minor tax routing. He did manage to get a temporary freeze on the public account attached to that specific entity. The account held exactly $12,000. He genuinely thought he had me backed into a corner. I was completely blind to the 9-figure trust, the offshore routing accounts, and the international holding company that actually fueled my global operations. It was a coordinated, deliberate squeeze. He wanted to drain me with aggressive legal fees. He wanted me to panic, to lose my apartment, to crawl back to my father begging for financial help. He assumed Terrence would then use my desperation to force me to apologize to the investors and save the logistics merger. My parents were letting him do it. They were actively cheering him on, celebrating my supposed destruction in a group chat. The audacity was staggering, but it was also a fatal tactical error. "Preston has no idea what he just did," I said, my voice cold and analytical. Isaiah grinned, picking up a pen. "By filing a lawsuit claiming financial injury to his company, he has formally opened the door to reciprocal discovery. If we file a countersuit for malicious prosecution, we get the legal right to subpoena his internal financial records to prove his company was already failing before you ever spoke to Mr. Lin. He thinks he is bullying a peasant, but he just handed us the legal crowbar to pry open his fraudulent ledgers. We are going to crush him," I stated, the realization solidifying into an absolute guarantee. "We can squash this initial injunction by noon tomorrow," Isaiah said, sliding a thick, pristine counter-suit draft across the glass table. "I already have the framework ready. We bury his boutique law firm in so much procedural paperwork they will not know which way is up. Then we demand full transparency on his alleged billion-dollar valuation." I nodded, feeling a deep, satisfying calm settle over me. I picked up my favorite fountain pen, ready to authorize the legal strike that would begin dismantling Preston's entire fraudulent empire piece by piece. But before the ink could touch the thick legal paper, a sharp, violent pounding echoed through the loft. I froze, my pen hovering over the signature line. Isaiah stood up immediately, his posture shifting into high alert. My private elevator required a verified encrypted keycard access just to reach my floor. The only way someone could be standing directly outside my reinforced steel door was if they had aggressively bypassed the lobby security guards or slipped into the elevator behind a resident. The banging grew significantly louder, aggressive and frantic, vibrating heavily against the metal doorframe. It was not the polite knock of a concierge or a delivery driver. It was the desperate, furious pounding of someone who felt entirely entitled to invade my space. I set the pen down on the glass table. The quiet, calculated peace of my strategy meeting shattered instantly. The war had just arrived at my front door. The heavy pounding against my reinforced steel door did not stop. It was a relentless, rhythmic assault that echoed through the vast open space of my loft. I tapped the digital security monitor embedded into the surface of my desk. The high-definition camera feed illuminated the private hallway outside. Standing there vibrating with a level of rage I had not seen in years was my mother. Valerie was wearing a pristine white tailored suit, clutching her signature designer handbag like a weapon. She must have aggressively tailgated another resident through the secure parking garage and slipped into the private elevator just to bypass the lobby concierge. I looked at Isaiah, my corporate counsel, who was already sliding the drafts of our countersuit into his leather briefcase. I held up a hand, signaling him to stay exactly where he was. I walked across the polished concrete floor and pressed the security release button. The heavy door swung open, and Valerie did not wait for an invitation. She barged into my home, her heels clicking aggressively against the floor. She marched straight into the center of my living area, her eyes darting around the space. My loft was over 3,000 square feet of custom architectural design, featuring exposed brick floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline and imported Italian furniture. But because it lacked the gaudy gold trim velvet drapery and massive crystal chandeliers she favored in her Buckhead mansion, she clearly thought I lived in a barren industrial warehouse. To Valerie, if wealth did not look like a 19th-century French palace, it was not real wealth. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not even acknowledge Isaiah sitting quietly at the glass conference table. She marched right up to my kitchen island and slapped a thick manila folder onto the black marble surface. "Sign it," she commanded, her voice sharp and breathless. I looked at the folder, then back up at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like a burden. I walked over and pulled the document out of the envelope. It was a settlement agreement accompanied by an incredibly strict non-disclosure agreement. I skimmed the first page, and a cold, genuine amusement washed over me. The terms were absolutely delusional. According to this legal fantasy, I was required to publicly release a statement admitting that my translation of Preston's business pitch to the investors was entirely incorrect. I was supposed to claim that I had fabricated the supply chain errors out of personal spite and professional incompetence. I was to assume full total responsibility for the tension with Mr. Lin and his associates. And as the absolute crowning jewel of this ridiculous document, I was legally bound to pay Preston $50,000 to cover the legal fees he incurred while filing his own frivolous defamation lawsuit against me. I set the papers back down on the marble counter. You drove all the way downtown, bypassed my building's security, and banged on my door like a debt collector just to hand me a piece of corporate fiction. You want me to admit to professional incompetence, destroy my own business reputation, and pay a man who insulted me to my face. Valerie slammed her hand flat against the counter, her eyes wide and manic. You ruined his investor meeting. You humiliated him in front of the people holding the key to this family's future. Signing this document is the absolute least you can do to make up for the catastrophic damage you caused. You owe this family, Chloe. We brought you into this world, and you have spent your entire adult life being a selfish, ungrateful disappointment. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool marble. I owe you absolutely nothing. You cut me off when I was 18 years old because I refused to be a prop in your social climbing games. You threw me out, and I built a life that you know absolutely nothing about. Preston filed a baseless lawsuit against my company to intimidate me. My legal team is going to bury him so deeply in discovery motions that he will never see the inside of a boardroom again. I am not signing this, and I am not paying that fraud a single dime. Valerie lost whatever thin thread of composure she was holding on to. Her face twisted into an ugly, desperate mask. She began pacing the floor, waving her arms frantically. "You know absolutely nothing about business," she screamed, her voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings. You think you are so smart with your little translation gigs, but you are destroying us. You are literally destroying us. Terrence's company is drowning. She stopped pacing and whipped around to face me, her chest heaving, the truth finally spilling out of her in a moment of reckless, unfiltered panic. We are completely bankrupt, Chloe. The logistics fleet has been bleeding money for 3 years. The bank sent a final foreclosure notice for the Buckhead house on Monday. We have nothing left. If Preston does not get that $500 million merger signed, he cannot bail out your father's business. We lose the house. We lose the cars. We lose everything. We will be out on the street because you decided to play language games to satisfy your bitter, jealous ego. I stood completely still. The room went dead silent, save for the ragged sound of my mother's breathing. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying, brilliant clarity. My parents were not just fiercely protecting a wealthy white son-in-law because they liked the social status he provided. They were fiercely protecting their own literal survival. They had mortgaged their entire existence, their home, their lifestyle, their fake reputation on a man who was secretly running a massive Ponzi scheme. They were desperately trying to force me to save a sinking ship, completely unaware that the captain of that ship was already drowning in his own offshore debt. The irony was almost poetic. They had tied their entire legacy to an anchor. I looked at my mother. The woman who had spent my entire life telling me I would amount to nothing was standing in my multi-million-dollar loft, admitting that her entire life was a financial mirage. I reached out, picked up the settlement agreement, and slid it directly back across the marble counter toward her. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "You traded your daughter for a fraud. Now you get to live with the consequences of your investment." Valerie's face flushed a deep, dangerous red. Her panic instantly hardened back into the vicious, vindictive cruelty I recognized from my childhood. She snatched the folder off the counter, clutching it against her chest. "Fine," she hissed, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "You want to play hardball. You seem to forget exactly who I am and what I can do." She stepped closer to me, lifting her chin with an arrogant, delusional pride. "I am the president of the Atlanta Heritage League. I control the social registry of the entire Black elite in this city. Every gala, every charity board, every high-profile networking event goes through me. I know the executives you scraped together for your little freelance translation business. If you do not sign this paper right now, I will personally see to it that you are permanently blacklisted from Atlanta high society." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my face. "I will ruin your name. I will make sure no one in this city ever hires you again. I will cut off your livelihood, Chloe. You will be an absolute pariah and you will lose this miserable little apartment. You have exactly 1 hour to change your mind, or I am making the calls." The heavy pounding against my reinforced steel door did not stop. It was a relentless, rhythmic assault that echoed through the vast open space of my loft. I tapped the digital security monitor embedded into the surface of my desk. The high-definition camera feed illuminated the private hallway outside. Standing there, vibrating with a level of rage I had not seen in years, was my mother. Valerie was wearing a pristine white tailored suit, clutching her signature designer handbag like a weapon. She must have aggressively tailgated another resident through the secure parking garage and slipped into the private elevator just to bypass the lobby concierge. I looked at Isaiah, my corporate counsel, who was already sliding the drafts of our countersuit into his leather briefcase. I held up a hand, signaling him to stay exactly where he was. I walked across the polished concrete floor and pressed the security release button. The heavy door swung open, and Valerie did not wait for an invitation. She barged into my home, her heels clicking aggressively against the floor. She marched straight into the center of my living area, her eyes darting around the space. My loft was over 3,000 square feet of custom architectural design, featuring exposed brick floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline and imported Italian furniture. But because it lacked the gaudy gold trim velvet drapery and massive crystal chandeliers she favored in her Buckhead mansion, she clearly thought I lived in a barren industrial warehouse. To Valerie, if wealth did not look like a 19th-century French palace, it was not real wealth. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not even acknowledge Isaiah sitting quietly at the glass conference table. She marched right up to my kitchen island and slapped a thick manila folder onto the black marble surface. "Sign it," she commanded, her voice sharp and breathless. I looked at the folder, then back up at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like a burden. I walked over and pulled the document out of the envelope. It was a settlement agreement accompanied by an incredibly strict non-disclosure agreement. I skimmed the first page and a cold, genuine amusement washed over me. The terms were absolutely delusional. According to this legal fantasy, I was required to publicly release a statement admitting that my translation of Preston's business pitch to the investors was entirely incorrect. I was supposed to claim that I had fabricated the supply chain errors out of personal spite and professional incompetence. I was to assume full total responsibility for the tension with Mr. Lin and his associates. And as the absolute crowning jewel of this ridiculous document, I was legally bound to pay Preston $50,000 to cover the legal fees he incurred while filing his own frivolous defamation lawsuit against me. I set the papers back down on the marble counter. "You drove all the way downtown, bypassed my building's security, and banged on my door like a debt collector just to hand me a piece of corporate fiction. You want me to admit to professional incompetence, destroy my own business reputation, and pay a man who insulted me to my face." Valerie slammed her hand flat against the counter, her eyes wide and manic. "You ruined his investor meeting. You humiliated him in front of the people holding the key to this family's future. Signing this document is the absolute least you can do to make up for the catastrophic damage you caused. You owe this family, Chloe. We brought you into this world, and you have spent your entire adult life being a selfish, ungrateful disappointment." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool marble. "I owe you absolutely nothing. You cut me off when I was 18 years old because I refused to be a prop in your social climbing games. You threw me out, and I built a life that you know absolutely nothing about. Preston filed a baseless lawsuit against my company to intimidate me. My legal team is going to bury him so deeply in discovery motions that he will never see the inside of a boardroom again. I am not signing this, and I am not paying that fraud a single dime." Valerie lost whatever thin thread of composure she was holding on to. Her face twisted into an ugly, desperate mask. She began pacing the floor, waving her arms frantically. "You know absolutely nothing about business," she screamed, her voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings. "You think you are so smart with your little translation gigs, but you are destroying us. You are literally destroying us. Terrence's company is drowning." She stopped pacing and whipped around to face me, her chest heaving, the truth finally spilling out of her in a moment of reckless, unfiltered panic. "We are completely bankrupt, Chloe. The logistics fleet has been bleeding money for 3 years. The bank sent a final foreclosure notice for the Buckhead house on Monday. We have nothing left. If Preston does not get that $500 million merger signed, he cannot bail out your father's business. We lose the house, we lose the cars, we lose everything. We will be out on the street because you decided to play language games to satisfy your bitter, jealous ego." I stood completely still. The room went dead silent, save for the ragged sound of my mother's breathing. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying, brilliant clarity. My parents were not just fiercely protecting a wealthy white son-in-law because they liked the social status he provided. They were fiercely protecting their own literal survival. They had mortgaged their entire existence, their home, their lifestyle, their fake reputation on a man who was secretly running a massive Ponzi scheme. They were desperately trying to force me to save a sinking ship, completely unaware that the captain of that ship was already drowning in his own offshore debt. The irony was almost poetic. They had tied their entire legacy to an anchor. I looked at my mother. The woman who had spent my entire life telling me I would amount to nothing was standing in my multi-million-dollar loft admitting that her entire life was a financial mirage. I reached out, picked up the settlement agreement, and slid it directly back across the marble counter toward her. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "You traded your daughter for a fraud. Now you get to live with the consequences of your investment." Valerie's face flushed a deep, dangerous red. Her panic instantly hardened back into the vicious, vindictive cruelty I recognized from my childhood. She snatched the folder off the counter, clutching it against her chest. "Fine," she hissed, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "You want to play hardball. You seem to forget exactly who I am and what I can do." She stepped closer to me, lifting her chin with an arrogant, delusional pride. I am the president of the Atlanta Heritage League. I control the social registry of the entire Black elite in this city. Every gala, every charity board, every high-profile networking event goes through me. I know the executives you scrape together for your little freelance translation business. If you do not sign this paper right now, I will personally see to it that you are permanently blacklisted from Atlanta high society. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my face. I will ruin your name. I will make sure no one in this city ever hires you again. I will cut off your livelihood, Chloe. You will be an absolute pariah and you will lose this miserable little apartment. You have exactly 1 hour to change your mind, or I am making the calls. I looked at the perfectly manicured finger hovering inches from my face. Valerie was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling beneath her pristine white tailored suit. She truly believed her position as president of the Atlanta Heritage League gave her the power of life and death over my career. She believed she held the keys to the kingdom, completely oblivious to who actually owned the castle. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached across the sleek marble island and picked up my phone. "What are you doing?" Valerie snapped, her eyes narrowing as she watched me tap the screen. "I told you that you have 1 hour. If you think you can call Terrence to negotiate, you are wasting your breath. He is just as furious as I am." "I am not calling Terrence," I replied smoothly. "I am saving you the trouble of making those blacklisting calls yourself." I tapped a contact saved under the name Sterling and pressed the speakerphone button. I set the phone face up on the marble counter right between us. The line rang exactly twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Good morning, Miss Chloe," the voice said, echoing clearly through the high ceilings of my loft. "This is Julian Sterling at the Atlanta Heritage League Executive Office. It is a pleasure to hear from you. How can we assist Obsidian Holdings today?" Valerie froze. The arrogant posture she had been maintaining, rigid and haughty, suddenly faltered. She recognized the voice immediately. Julian Sterling was the executive director of the club, the man who handled the board of directors and the exclusive financial accounts for the most elite Black families in the city. Valerie interacted with him daily as president, but he had never spoken to her with the deep, reverent deference he was currently using with me. "Good morning, Julian," I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "I am calling regarding the corporate sponsorship account held by Obsidian Holdings. Specifically, the Platinum membership tier allocated to Terrence and Valerie." Valerie opened her mouth, her eyes darting between me and the phone in sheer panic, but the words died in her throat. "Yes, Miss Chloe," Julian replied promptly. "The account is fully current. Your holding company has generously covered their annual dues, the special assessment fees, and the Presidential Discretionary Fund for the past 5 years. Would you like to authorize the upcoming gala expenses for next month?" Valerie stumbled back a step. Her expensive designer heels scraped awkwardly against the polished concrete floor. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking ashen and hollow. She was hearing her entire reality unravel in real time over a speakerphone. For 5 years, she had paraded around the Atlanta Heritage League, throwing lavish charity dinners and looking down on other families who could not afford the sudden hikes in membership dues. She had built her entire identity on being the undisputed queen of Atlanta high society. She had convinced herself and everyone else that Terrence's logistics company was funding their lavish lifestyle. She had absolutely no idea that when Terrence quietly went bankrupt 5 years ago, the country club board was prepared to publicly expel them for unpaid dues. She did not know that I had stepped in anonymously through my holding company to cover their massive debts and prepay their platinum status indefinitely. I had bought her the very throne she was currently trying to use to destroy me. "No, Julian," I said, staring directly into my mother's horrified eyes. "I am calling to revoke that sponsorship, effective immediately. Obsidian Holdings will no longer serve as the financial guarantor for Terrence and Valerie. Please terminate their platinum membership, cancel their access to the Presidential Discretionary Fund, and withdraw my backing from their account." There was a brief professional pause on the other end of the line. Julian was too well trained to express shock, but the sudden shift in protocol was undeniable. "Understood, Miss Chloe," he said smoothly. "Without the corporate sponsorship and the financial guarantor in place, their account falls vastly below the mandatory minimums for board membership. We will have to suspend their club access and remove her from the presidency immediately per the bylaws. I know, I replied. Please process it right away. Have a wonderful day, Julian. Thank you, Miss Chloe. I ended the call. The silence that fell over my loft was absolute and crushing. Valerie was trembling. Her hands shook so violently that she had to grip the edge of the marble island just to stay upright. She stared at me as if I had just transformed into a terrifying, unrecognizable monster right in front of her. The illusion she had fiercely protected for decades was dead. The social status she valued more than her own flesh and blood had just been wiped out in a 10-second phone call. "You paid for it," she whispered, her voice cracking, sounding fragile and incredibly old. "You were the anonymous corporate sponsor. You paid the board. I paid the dues, the gala fees, and the private dining tabs." I confirmed, my voice entirely devoid of pity. Because 5 years ago, when Terrence first started bleeding out his fleet assets to cover his bad bets, the board was going to publicly evict you. I knew losing your social standing would destroy you, so I quietly kept you afloat. I let you play Queen of the Country Club while you spent your free time telling your friends what a massive disappointment I was. I bought your status, Valerie. And now I am taking it back. "You cannot do this!" she gasped, tears finally spilling over her lashes and ruining her immaculate makeup. "You cannot take the presidency away from me. The Winter Gala is next week. All my friends, all my contacts, everyone will know. They will know we are broke. I will be ruined. Chloe, please, you cannot humiliate me like this." Before I could respond, a sharp buzzing vibration echoed through the room. It was coming from Valerie's designer handbag. She flinched as if she had been struck. With trembling, uncoordinated fingers, she unclasped the bag and pulled out her smartphone. The screen was illuminated with a new email notification. I did not need to see the screen to know exactly what it said. Efficiency. Valerie stared at the screen. A choked, agonizing sob tore from her throat. The suspension email had arrived. Her access was revoked. Her presidency was terminated. The elite social circle she had sacrificed her own daughter to impress had just locked her out forever. She dropped the phone. It clattered harshly against the marble counter. The manic, arrogant woman who had marched into my home threatening to destroy my livelihood was completely gone. In her place was a broken, hysterical shell of a person, realizing that her entire life had been a borrowed fantasy. "You are a monster!" Valerie screamed, the tears flowing freely now, hot and desperate. "You are a cold, vindictive monster. We are your family. You are supposed to protect us. You came into my home to force me into taking the blame for a fraud," I stated calmly. "You threatened to destroy my business and my reputation so you could keep living in a mansion you cannot afford. You do not get to cry about protection when you walked in here carrying a weapon." Valerie grabbed the settlement papers off the counter, clutching the useless documents to her chest, as if they could somehow shield her from reality. She backed away from me, her chest heaving with hysterical, ragged breaths. "Preston will destroy you!" she shrieked, her voice echoing wildly toward the reinforced steel door. "You think you are so smart with your hidden money and your holding companies. You think you have won because you took my club away. Preston is going to rip you apart. He has real power. He has connections you cannot even fathom. When he finds out what you did today, he will crush your miserable little business into dust." She spun around and ran toward the exit. She practically threw herself against the heavy door, yanking it open with frantic, desperate energy. She did not look back. She fled down the private hallway, her sobs echoing loudly until the elevator doors finally swallowed the sound of her retreat. The heavy steel door swung shut on its automatic hinges, locking with a solid, satisfying click. I stood in my quiet, sunlit loft, the air feeling significantly lighter now that she was gone. I looked over at Isaiah, my corporate counsel, who was still sitting calmly at the glass conference table. He had watched the entire exchange without moving a single muscle. He casually picked up his pen and tapped it against the malicious prosecution countersuit we had drafted earlier. "Well," Isaiah said, a sharp, predatory smile curving his lips, "it sounds like Preston is going to be very busy trying to destroy us. Should we give him something to actually worry about?" I smiled back, walking over to the conference table and taking my seat. I pulled my laptop toward me and opened my encrypted communication terminal. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to tear Preston down to the studs. "Let us find out exactly who this supposed billionaire really is," I said. "Open the intelligence files. Let us see what Preston is hiding." I typed my decryption key into the secure terminal built seamlessly into the surface of the glass conference table. The massive screen mounted on the exposed brick wall of my loft flickered to life, bathing the room in a sharp blue light. Isaiah remained seated across from me, his posture relaxed, but his eyes locked onto the screen, with the predatory focus of a seasoned litigator, preparing to dismantle a target. I tapped the secure communications icon on my dashboard, connecting a highly encrypted video channel to our London office. Within seconds, the face of my lead forensic accountant Malik appeared on the monitor. Malik was brilliant, relentless, and operated with a cold mathematical precision that made him the most feared auditor in international corporate intelligence. It was the middle of the night in London, but he was wide awake, a cup of black coffee resting on his desk. "We have a live target," I told him, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I need a comprehensive deep dive into an Atlanta-based tech logistics company. The CEO is Preston. I want tax returns, offshore routing ledgers, property deeds, and venture capital histories. I want to know where every single cent of his funding originated and exactly where it is going. If he bought a cup of coffee in the last 5 years, I want to know whose money he used to pay for it." Malik did not ask questions. He simply nodded and his fingers began flying across his keyboard. The sound of rapid keystrokes echoed softly through the speakers in my loft. Within minutes, raw data began streaming onto the shared wall monitor in real time. "Let us see what kind of billionaire this man really is," Isaiah murmured, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the glass table. It did not take long for the shiny, expensive facade to crack. In fact, it shattered almost immediately. "This is a complete fabrication," Malik announced, his voice laced with professional disgust. He threw a series of heavily redacted financial disclosures onto the main screen, highlighting glaring discrepancies in bright red. "Preston does not own the Buckhead mansion he is currently living in. It is leased through a shell company registered in Delaware, and the rent is currently 60 days past due. The luxury vehicles he drives are corporate leases scheduled for repossession next month. I am looking at his personal liquid cash on hand across all domestic accounts. He has less than $40,000 to his name." Isaiah let out a low, sharp whistle. "He is pitching a $500 million merger to Mr. Lin and his Shanghai investors. You do not get in a room with foreign billionaires with 40 grand in the bank. Where is the seed money coming from? How is he keeping the lights on?" "That is where it gets incredibly dangerous," Malik said, pulling up a complex web of wire transfers and offshore holding accounts. He raised $80 million over the past 2 years from domestic venture capitalists. He promised them a revolutionary supply chain routing software that would optimize shipping speeds by 40%. "And the software?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. "It is a ghost," Malik confirmed, shaking his head. "It does not exist. He reskinned a legacy logistics program from a defunct company he bought for pennies 3 years ago. The code is completely broken. It barely functions on a local level, let alone on a global scale." I stared at the screen, the sheer audacity of Preston's deception settling over me. "So where did the $80 million go?" "He is running a massive, highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme," Malik explained, tracing a highlighted red line from an offshore account back to a domestic bank. "He is using the new investor capital he brings in to pay fake dividends to his older investors, keeping the illusion of extreme profitability alive. He is burning through millions just to maintain his wealthy lifestyle and pay the exorbitant interest rates on his secret private equity loans. He is robbing Peter to pay Paul, but the well has run completely dry." I looked closer at the logistical routing maps Malik was projecting. Preston claimed to have a massive physical footprint across the American South. He had to be faking physical shipping manifests to prove to his investors that his software was actually moving product. "Pull up his domestic carrier network." I instructed, a sudden sickening realization forming in my mind. Who is executing his physical deliveries? Malik filtered the data, isolating Preston's primary domestic shipping partner. A familiar corporate logo flashed onto the screen. It was my father's logistics company. Isaiah sat back in his chair, his eyes widening as he put the pieces together. "Your father is not just relying on Preston for a financial bailout." "No," I said, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Preston is using Terrence's empty warehouses and idle shipping trucks to fake physical movement. He is routing empty trucks across state lines and logging them as fulfilled high-value tech shipments to artificially inflate his corporate value. My father was not just a victim of a bad business deal. He was the physical front for a massive federal fraud operation. He was so blinded by his desperation to climb the Atlanta social ladder and secure a white billionaire son-in-law that he handed Preston the keys to his entire operation without ever running a basic audit. If Preston went down, Terrence was going down right alongside him as a direct accessory to wire fraud and conspiracy. He had sold his own daughter out to protect a man who was actively framing him for federal crimes. Why is Preston pushing so hard for this merger with Mr. Lin? Right now, Isaiah asked, tapping his pen against the table. If he is running a Ponzi scheme, inviting a ruthless Shanghai conglomerate to look at his books is suicide. Unless he has absolutely no other choice. Malik dove into the debt schedules, bypassing domestic files and accessing international loan registries. He pulled up a deeply buried contract and magnified it on the screen. He has no other choice. Malik confirmed, his tone grim. Preston owes $50 million to an unregulated private equity firm operating out of Macau. They are known for their ties to some very unforgiving, violent people. The balloon payment on that loan is due in exactly 14 days. If Mr. Lin's $500 million merger does not close by next week, the entire Ponzi scheme collapses instantly. Preston does not just go bankrupt. He goes to federal prison for the rest of his life, assuming his creditors do not get to him first. He is a trapped rat and the walls are closing in. The silence in my loft was profound. The arrogant racist man who had ordered me to scrub his shoes at the country club was actually a desperate cornered criminal, hours away from total annihilation. He was suing me for defamation to silence me because he knew that a single negative rumor could spook the Shanghai investors and destroy his only lifeline. Isaiah steepled his fingers, resting his chin on his hands. A Shanghai conglomerate like Mr. Lin's organization does not just hand over $500 million based on a flashy presentation at a country club engagement party. They are meticulous. They are notoriously paranoid about North American acquisitions. Someone has to aggressively audit Preston's books, tear apart his software claims, and formally greenlight the merger before a single cent is transferred. I looked at the massive wall monitor, the ultimate piece of the puzzle hanging just out of reach. Malik, I said, my voice tight with anticipation, pull the corporate filing for Mr. Lin's conglomerate. I want to know exactly who they contract for their North American corporate intelligence and risk assessment. Find out who holds the proxy authority to approve or deny this $500 million merger. Malik's keystrokes echoed softly through the speakers. A progress bar flashed across the screen as he breached the public filing records of the Shanghai conglomerate. A single highly classified contract document appeared on the wall monitor, highlighting the designated North American proxy firm. The room went perfectly, absolutely silent. Isaiah stared at the screen, a low, dark chuckle escaping his lips. I read the name of the contracted proxy firm out loud. It was my firm. It was the exact corporate entity operating directly under my holding company. Preston had absolutely no idea. The broke, invisible black sister he was currently suing, attempting to bankrupt and trying to publicly destroy, held the literal, absolute veto power over his entire existence. He had handed his neck directly to the executioner, and he did not even know the blade was falling. Isaiah leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face as the sheer magnitude of the revelations settled over the room. He let out a loud, sharp bark of laughter that bounced off the exposed brick walls of my loft. I kept my eyes locked on the glowing wall monitor, watching the official proxy contract between my holding company and Mr. Lin's conglomerate scroll across the screen. The irony was so potent it practically choked the air in the room. Let me get this perfectly straight, Isaiah said, his voice dripping with absolute disbelief. This mediocre con artist is currently paying a boutique Atlanta law firm $500 an hour to aggressively sue the exact corporate entity he desperately needs to approve his $500 million lifeline. He is trying to freeze the public assets of the woman who holds the sole, unquestionable veto power over his entire financial survival. That is precisely the situation, Malik confirmed from his secure feed in London. He adjusted his glasses, leaning closer to his own camera. Mr. Lin's investment protocols are notoriously rigid. The Shanghai conglomerate does not wire a single cent of capital into North American tech acquisitions without a finalized certified risk assessment audit originating directly from your desk, Chloe. You are their designated proxy. They trust your firm implicitly because you have a flawless track record of identifying exactly this type of fraudulent phantom tech. I stared at the glowing corporate seal on the monitor. The engagement party flashed through my mind in vivid high definition. I saw Preston spilling wine on his own shoe. I heard him calling me a clumsy maid in broken Mandarin. I remembered the smug, arrogant look on his face when he threatened to have me fired from the country club. He had been posturing, trying to impress Mr. Lin, completely oblivious to the fact that the billionaire he was desperately courting answered directly to my risk analysis. He really thought I was just a freelance translator, I said, my voice quiet and dangerously calm. He truly believed he was intimidating a helpless broke woman who got lucky at a party. Isaiah shook his head, picking up the frivolous lawsuit Preston had served me earlier that morning. It is a spectacular level of delusion. He did not run a single background check on your LLC. If his legal team had dug even an inch below the surface of your public registration, they would have found the routing numbers connecting you to the international proxy firm. But his arrogance blinded him. He just assumed, because you are a black woman, your family cast aside that you could not possibly possess resources greater than his own. And now he is trapped, Malik added, bringing up a new data stream on the monitor. The timing on this merger is incredibly tight. Mr. Lin requires the final risk assessment report submitted 48 hours prior to the public signing. I have been monitoring Preston's public relations feeds. He has already sent out press releases to every major financial news outlet in the city. He is hosting a massive signing gala next Friday at a luxury hotel downtown. He is planning to finalize the merger on stage in front of the media to artificially pump up his domestic valuation. I felt a cold, satisfying thrill wash through my veins. A massive, highly publicized gala. It was the perfect stage. Preston was building his own execution block and inviting the entire city to watch. What about my father? I asked, shifting my focus to the logistical nightmare Terrence had created for himself. If Mr. Lin's conglomerate pulls out of this merger, what happens to the domestic shipping front? Preston is running through Terrence's warehouses. Malik did not hesitate. The entire house of cards collapses instantly. The moment the Shanghai funding is formally denied, the domestic venture capitalists who gave Preston that initial $80 million will panic. They will demand an immediate audit of his physical shipping manifests. When they realize his software is a ghost, and the trucks are running completely empty, the federal authorities will step in. Your father is the primary registered carrier for a federal wire fraud operation. Ignorance will not save him. Terrence tied his sinking ship to a man carrying a massive anchor. He will lose the business, the Buckhead mansion, and likely his freedom. I absorbed the weight of Malik's words. My parents had dragged me into that VIP lounge and demanded I sacrifice my dignity to save that very business. Valerie had marched into my home and threatened to destroy my social standing to protect the mansion they could no longer afford. They had chosen their golden child's fraudulent fiancé over their own flesh and blood. They had made their bed, and now they were going to have to lie in it, while the entire structure burned to the ground. So we execute the kill order right now, Isaiah said, breaking the silence. He pulled his laptop closer, opening a blank legal document. I will draft the official proxy denial notice. We cite critical supply chain discrepancies, offshore debt liabilities, and fraudulent domestic carrier partnerships. We submit the rejection directly to Mr. Lin's executive board tonight. Malik nodded in agreement from the screen. Once the proxy rejection is logged, the Shanghai conglomerate will formally withdraw their offer by morning. The Macau private equity firm will get wind of the failed merger within hours. Preston's creditors will start freezing his accounts before lunchtime. He will not even make it to the end of the week. Do I have your authorization to transmit the preliminary audit findings to Shanghai? I sat back in my leather chair looking at the two brilliant men who helped me run my empire. They were ready to end the war quietly, efficiently, and cleanly. That was the standard protocol. It was the smart, bloodless way to handle corporate fraud. But Preston had not been quiet. He had tried to publicly humiliate me. He had spoken to me like I was garbage on the bottom of his shoe. Valerie had threatened to blacklist my name across the city. Terrence had told me I was dead to the family. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to show off their fake wealth and their stolen power to the entire world. I reached out and gently closed Isaiah's laptop, shutting the screen. "No," I said, my voice echoing smoothly through the quiet loft. Isaiah looked up, surprised by the interruption. "No to the draft or no to the transmission?" "No to all of it," I replied, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "If we kill this deal quietly in a corporate email, Preston will find a way to spin it. He will tell his domestic investors that he walked away because the terms were not favorable. He will tell my family that the foreign market was too volatile. Valerie and Jada will continue to believe he is a billionaire genius who just suffered a minor setback. They will never know the absolute truth, and they will never face the public humiliation they have spent their entire lives trying to inflict on me." Malik leaned closer to his camera, his eyes narrowing with sudden understanding. "You want to let him play out the string?" "I want him to feel exactly what he tried to make me feel." I stated, my tone hardening into pure steel. "I want him to stand in a room full of people he desperately needs to impress and realize he is completely powerless. He invited the press. He invited the city's elite. He invited my toxic family to watch him secure $500 million. I looked at the glowing monitor, locking eyes with my lead auditor. "Do not send the rejection notice to Shanghai. Let Mr. Lin proceed as if the risk assessment is still pending final verbal approval. Let Preston rent the ballroom, hire the caterers, and put on his bespoke tuxedo." Isaiah let out a low, appreciative breath, leaning back in his chair. "You are going to let him host his signing gala." "I am going to let him build the highest pedestal possible," I said, my smile turning sharp and ruthless. "And then I am going to walk into that gala and kick it right out from under him." I told Isaiah to do absolutely nothing. I instructed my legal team to hold back the countersuit and ignore the aggressive emails pouring in from Preston's boutique law firm. I told them not to contest the emergency asset freeze on my public-facing limited liability company. Let the $12,000 sit in legal limbo. Silence is the most terrifying and destructive weapon you can use against a narcissist because it completely starves them of the reaction they so desperately crave. I wanted Preston to feel the intoxicating delusional rush of an unopposed victory. I instructed Malik to maintain a flawless digital firewall around our actual holding companies, ensuring that not a single trace of my real wealth or my proxy status leaked into the public domain. For the next 10 days, I became a ghost. I did not respond to the lawsuit. I did not answer the blocked phone calls that I knew were Terrence trying to scream at me. I simply sat in my highly secure downtown loft, watching the surveillance feeds and social media tracking tools my intelligence team had set up to monitor my entire family. The digital spectacle they put on was a masterclass in psychological overcompensation. My massive glass monitors displayed a constant stream of their frantic desperation disguised as triumph. Jada was treating her social media accounts like a reality television broadcast. She posted daily updates about the upcoming wedding of the century, flashing her diamond ring in front of high-end boutiques and luxury car dealerships. She posted a long, highly edited video twirling in a $50,000 custom bridal gown with a caption boasting about how her billionaire fiancé was sparing absolutely no expense for his queen. Of course, Malik had already hacked the vendor ledgers and verified that the massive deposit for that designer dress was paid using a high-interest credit card Preston had fraudulently opened under the name of a fake corporate subsidiary. They were funding a high-society fantasy wedding with stolen venture capital. Valerie was spinning completely out of control, trying to manage her catastrophic social downfall. After I had her formally suspended from the Atlanta Heritage League and stripped of her presidency, she immediately went into extreme damage control online. She posted lengthy passive-aggressive statuses about how she had outgrown local petty social clubs and was now focusing her elite energy on international corporate mergers with her future son-in-law. She posted heavily filtered photos of the Buckhead mansion, carefully cropping out the bank foreclosure notices taped to the front security gate. She weaponized her posts directly against me without ever using my name, sharing articles about cutting out toxic, jealous family members who could not handle seeing Black excellence thrive. She even posted a picture of Preston and Terrence smoking expensive cigars on a country club patio with a caption about how real men build generational wealth while bitter spinsters choke on their own envy. Terrence was just as reckless in his public deception. He posted staged photos of his empty logistics warehouses, carefully angled to look like they were undergoing massive renovations to handle the impending influx of Preston's global routing traffic. He gave arrogant interviews to local Atlanta business blogs bragging about his upcoming role as the primary domestic carrier for a $500 million tech conglomerate. He was tying a concrete block around his own ankles and eagerly jumping into the deep end of the ocean, completely unaware that federal investigators would eventually use those exact blog posts as documented evidence of his complicity in international wire fraud. The mockery grew bolder and more vicious as the days ticked down to the signing gala. Preston texted the family group chat again, sending a screenshot of an email from his legal team confirming that my public company had not filed a response to the defamation lawsuit. He wrote that the ugly dropout had finally learned her place and gone into permanent hiding. Jada replied with laughing emojis stating it was sad but necessary to take out the trash before stepping into high society. They genuinely believed my silence was proof of my absolute defeat. They thought they had successfully bullied me back into submission, assuming I was sitting in a tiny rundown apartment somewhere crying over my frozen bank account and lamenting my exclusion from their glamorous world. While they were busy popping cheap champagne and bragging to strangers on the internet, my team was meticulously orchestrating the final drop. I spent my days in highly secure encrypted video conferences with Mr. Lin's executive board in Shanghai. I reviewed every single fabricated ledger Preston had submitted to their analysts. I highlighted the hidden offshore debts, the ghost software programming, and the fraudulent domestic carrier agreements connecting directly back to my father. Mr. Lin was a man of lethal business precision, and he was absolutely infuriated that an arrogant American fraudster had attempted to play him for a fool. But Mr. Lin also appreciated the brutal, unyielding efficiency of public corporate executions. When I proposed my plan to let Preston host the gala and build his own scaffold, Mr. Lin agreed without a single moment of hesitation. We coordinated the exact timing of the strike down to the second. The official press releases went out 48 hours before the event. Major financial news networks in Atlanta announced that Preston's tech logistics startup was hosting a red carpet signing gala at the most exclusive luxury hotel downtown to finalize a $500 million international merger. Jada immediately posted a picture of the physical invitations bragging that the guest list was tighter than Fort Knox and that only the most elite billionaires in the state were allowed in the room. She explicitly stated in a live video broadcast that any jealous broke relatives were strictly banned by the hotel security team. She was so incredibly proud of herself for publicly locking me out of the biggest night of her life. On the morning before the gala, a specialized private courier arrived at my secure downtown loft. He bypassed the standard building mailroom and was escorted directly to my penthouse floor by my private security detail. He carried a highly secure, tamper-proof diplomatic pouch. Isaiah and I stood by the glass conference table as I signed for the delivery and unsealed the heavy plastic. Inside was not a legal threat or a desperate plea from my parents. It was a heavy gold-embossed envelope bearing the official corporate seal of Mr. Lin's Shanghai conglomerate. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, customized VIP all-access lanyard and a personalized invitation printed on heavy textured cardstock. My family had spent 2 entire weeks bragging about how they had successfully banned me from the most important night of their lives. They had made sure my name was flagged by the venue security to prevent me from ruining their fraudulent fairy tale. But they did not control the event. The investors did. And the lead investor holding the $500 million check had just formally invited his chief North American risk advisor to the absolute front row. I ran my fingers over the gold lettering, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Jada and Valerie desperately wanted to lock me out of the castle, but they had absolutely no idea I was the one holding the master key. The Friday evening of the signing gala arrived with the kind of suffocating humidity that only Atlanta can produce. Preston had rented the entire grand ballroom of the most expensive luxury hotel downtown. He had invited local news anchors, financial bloggers, and every high society socialite. My parents had spent the last 2 decades desperately trying to impress. I sat in the back of my idling armored SUV a block away, watching the live stream of the event on my tablet. The ballroom was a blinding sea of flashing camera bulbs, towering floral arrangements, and desperate social climbing. Jada was standing near a massive custom ice sculpture, shaped like 2 interlocking rings holding court with a circle of bridesmaids. She was wearing a custom beaded gown that Preston had purchased using stolen venture capital. It was a dress that cost more than a luxury car, and she paraded it around the room like a crown she had actually earned. Through the live stream audio, I could hear her voice carrying over the string quartet. She was laughing loudly, telling her friends how tragic it was that some people just could not handle being around real success. She explicitly bragged that she had given the hotel security team a photo of her jealous broke sister with strict orders to arrest me for trespassing if I even stepped foot on the property. She told her bridesmaids that it was a shame I had chosen to live in poverty, but that she could not let my bitter energy ruin her flawless transition into the billionaire class. Valerie and Terrence were right beside her, soaking up the attention like parched earth. My father was actually giving an interview to a local business reporter near the open bar. He was puffing out his chest, boasting about how his logistics fleet was about to revolutionize international shipping and secure our family legacy for generations. My mother was nodding along, casually dropping the price of the catering into the conversation to ensure the reporter knew exactly how much money they were supposedly worth. They were completely intoxicated by a mirage, celebrating their own survival on the deck of a sinking ship. They truly believed they had won. I closed my tablet and handed it to my lead security director. It was time to end the fantasy. My driver pulled the SUV smoothly up to the private loading dock of the hotel, completely bypassing the front entrance where Jada had stationed her misguided security guards. My legal and financial team was already waiting for me in the private service corridor. Isaiah held a thick leather briefcase containing the forensic audit, while Malik monitored the digital feeds from London on a secure tablet. I stepped out of the vehicle wearing a tailored designer power suit in a deep striking crimson. It was the armor of a woman who owned the battlefield. We moved silently through the back halls of the hotel, guided by the precise schedule I had coordinated with Mr. Lin. Inside the ballroom, Preston was making his move. The live audio feed in my earpiece relayed every word. I heard Preston tap his champagne glass with a silver spoon. The string quartet faded out instantly. The murmurs of the elite crowd quieted down as Preston took the stage. He stood behind a massive mahogany desk where the thick leather-bound merger contracts lay open waiting for signatures. He gave a smug, heavily rehearsed speech about his own visionary genius, about building empires from the ground up, and about the beautiful woman he was going to marry the next day. He then gestured grandly to the front row, inviting Mr. Lin to the stage to formalize the $500 million partnership and cement their future. Mr. Lin walked up the short steps to the podium with slow, measured precision. He did not smile. He did not wave to the flashing cameras. He did not reach for the expensive gold-plated pen that Preston so eagerly held out to him. Instead, Mr. Lin stepped up to the microphone and adjusted it with a sharp, deliberate movement. His voice echoed through the massive ballroom, sharp, cold, and utterly unyielding. He thanked the guests for their attendance, but stated clearly that his Shanghai conglomerate did not blindly sign half-billion-dollar transfers based on cocktail party speeches. He announced to the confused crowd of reporters and socialites that the final execution of this merger required the physical presence and absolute authorization of his highest-ranking executive. He stated that he refused to sign a single piece of paper until his chief North American risk advisor arrived to personally greenlight the contract. The silence in the ballroom was immediate and palpable. I stood in the darkened hallway just outside the main doors listening as Preston nervously cleared his throat. He tried to laugh it off, attempting to save face in front of the press and his future in-laws. He grabbed the microphone, his voice tight with barely concealed panic. He joked to the crowd that they had plenty of champagne to keep everyone busy while they waited for this mystery advisor to show up. He leaned over and asked Mr. Lin if his executive got stuck in the notorious Atlanta traffic. Mr. Lin did not laugh. He did not offer a polite face-saving chuckle. He looked at his luxury watch with absolute precision, then looked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom toward the back entrance. He leaned into the microphone one last time. "My chief advisor is never late," Mr. Lin announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Right on cue, the towering oak double doors at the back of the grand ballroom unlatched and swung wide open. I stepped over the threshold, my crimson-tailored suit cutting a brilliant razor-sharp line through the sea of muted tuxedos and pastel evening gowns. Flanking me were Isaiah and Malik, stepping in perfect intimidating synchronization, followed by 3 senior financial auditors carrying thick silver briefcases, holding the forensic destruction of Preston's entire life. We did not walk like guests attending a celebration. We walked like a corporate execution squad entering a hostile takeover. Jada spotted me instantly. Her $50,000 custom-beaded gown caught the harsh glare of the camera flashes as she practically leaped away from her massive ice sculpture. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. Her voice, usually a practiced breathy whisper, for the social media cameras tore through the elegant ballroom in a harsh, unhinged shriek. She screamed for the hotel security, demanding they throw the jealous, broke stalker out of her engagement gala immediately. She yelled at the top of her lungs that I was a pathetic, obsessed loser who could not stand to see her sister marry a billionaire, and that I had crawled out of my miserable little apartment just to ruin her perfect night. 2 burly hotel security guards started to move toward us, looking confused but reacting to the bride's absolute hysteria. I did not break my stride. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the stage at the front of the room. Isaiah did not even break his stride either. He simply reached into his breast pocket and held up a laminated gold-embossed security clearance badge issued directly by Mr. Lin's conglomerate. The hotel guards took one look at the international VIP credentials, stopped dead in their tracks, and immediately backed away, refusing to intervene. Jada realized the guards were not coming to her rescue. Her panic morphed into a wild, desperate rage. She hiked up the heavy, sparkling skirts of her massive gown and threw herself directly into the center aisle, physically blocking my path to the stage. She spread her arms wide, her face twisted in an ugly, flushed scowl. She screamed that I was absolutely nothing, that I had no right to breathe the same air as real wealth, and that she would personally have me thrown in jail for trespassing on her property. She demanded I turn around and go back to the gutter where my parents had rightfully left me. Preston stood at the podium, frozen in place. His face was caught in a bizarre, panicked grimace as he tried to figure out how to handle the sudden chaos without alarming his investors. He opened his mouth, likely to call for his own private security team to drag me out of the building. But before Preston could issue a single command, the heavy, booming voice of Mr. Lin echoed through the microphone, amplified perfectly by the massive ballroom speakers. Mr. Lin slammed his hand down on the thick mahogany desk, the sound cracking like a whip. He ordered Preston to immediately control his unhinged fiancé. He spoke in crisp, heavily accented English, so that every single reporter, socialite, and family member in the room could understand him perfectly. He commanded Jada to step away from his chief North American risk advisor immediately, or he would withdraw his $500 million capital investment right then and there. Jada froze. Her arms were still awkwardly raised in the air, her fingers curled into tense claws. The ugly, victorious sneer on her face dissolved into a blank, vacant stare of pure confusion. She slowly lowered her arms and looked back at Preston on the stage, expecting him to correct the foreign billionaire. She expected Preston to laugh, to tap the microphone and explain to Mr. Lin that I was just the bitter, disowned family disappointment trying to cause a scene. But Preston was not laughing. He was not tapping the microphone. He was staring directly at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his jaw hanging completely slack. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse standing under the stage lights. His gaze dropped from my face to the heavy obsidian corporate badge hanging from the lanyard around my neck. It bore the exact same intricate gold seal printed on Mr. Lin's investment contracts sitting on the desk in front of him. The catastrophic reality of his situation collided with his brain all at once. The woman he had sued for defamation, the woman he had tried to bankrupt, the woman he had degraded and insulted in a language he assumed she could not understand, was the absolute highest authority in the room. He realized I had not been hiding in fear for the past 2 weeks. I had been quietly holding the guillotine rope waiting for him to place his own head on the block. Valerie and Terrence pushed aggressively through the whispering crowd rushing to Jada's side. They stopped dead in their tracks right next to her, the gravity of Mr. Lin's booming declaration finally crashing into their reality. My father stared at the team of high-powered lawyers flanking me. My mother stared at the bespoke crimson suit I wore, her eyes calculating the immense cost of the fabric she had claimed I could never afford. The low, frantic murmurs of the Atlanta elite died out completely. The reporters lowered their cameras, sensing a massive shift in the atmosphere. The string quartet had long since stopped playing. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. In that deafening quiet, the fake empire my family had built evaporated into thin air. Preston, Jada, Valerie, and Terrence stood paralyzed in the center aisle, finally realizing my true identity, my absolute status, and the terrifying fact that they were entirely at my mercy. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute and suffocating. It was the kind of heavy, pressurized quiet that only occurs when an entire room full of powerful people simultaneously realizes a catastrophic shift in the hierarchy has just taken place. Preston stood at the presentation podium, his hands gripping the edges of the mahogany desk so tightly his knuckles had turned completely white. The color had entirely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, pale gray under the bright stage lights. The smug, untouchable billionaire persona he had paraded around Atlanta for the past year was disintegrating right in front of my eyes. I kept my pace steady and deliberate as I walked down the center aisle, the sharp click of my heels echoing sharply against the polished marble floor. Isaiah and Malik walked perfectly in step beside me, projecting an aura of impenetrable corporate authority. Preston watched us approach, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. The terrifying reality of his situation was crashing down on him in real time. He remembered the racist insult he had hurled at me in Mandarin. He remembered the completely baseless defamation lawsuit he had filed just to drain my bank accounts and stroke his own ego. He realized that the woman he had desperately tried to bankrupt and humiliate was the exact same woman who held the sole authority to either approve or destroy his $500 million lifeline. As I reached the front of the ballroom, Preston finally broke his paralysis. Panic completely overrode his pride. He scrambled out from behind the podium, nearly tripping over the microphone cord in his haste to reach me before I could step onto the stage. He plastered a frantic, utterly unconvincing smile onto his face, attempting to project an image of familial warmth for the flashing cameras and the confused reporters watching our every move. "Chloe," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly before he forced it into a lower, desperately jovial register. "What an incredible surprise. You really had us going there for a minute." He stepped directly into my path, trying to block me from reaching Mr. Lin. He reached out as if to embrace me, a fake, sweaty gesture of brotherhood that made my stomach turn. Isaiah instantly stepped between us, using his broad shoulders to physically box Preston out. Preston recoiled, his fake smile faltering as he looked into Isaiah's cold, unyielding stare. Preston quickly realized the cameras were capturing his desperation. He lowered his voice to a frantic, begging whisper, leaning in close so only my team could hear him. "Chloe, please," he hissed, the sweat beading on his forehead and shining under the chandeliers. "Let us just keep things professional. We are family. This is just a massive misunderstanding. You know how stressful wedding planning can be. I was out of line at the country club, and I withdraw the lawsuit. I will call my lawyers right now and drop the whole thing. Just come sit down at the VIP table. We can discuss your risk assessment over dinner. We can make a deal. I will give your firm a massive consultation bonus. Just please keep this professional and let me sign the contract." I stopped and looked at the pathetic, crumbling man standing in front of me. He was offering me a consultation bonus, using money he did not even have, begging me to validate a Ponzi scheme just to save his own skin. He truly believed that because I was a black woman, I could be bought off with a VIP seat and a hollow apology. He thought my professional integrity was just a negotiating tactic. There is absolutely nothing to negotiate. Preston, I replied, my voice ringing with cold, effortless authority. You wanted me to learn a lesson in real wealth and respect. I am simply here to deliver the curriculum. I did not wait for his response. I bypassed him entirely, stepping up the short stairs onto the main stage. Mr. Lin gave me a sharp, respectful nod as I approached the podium. He stepped aside, relinquishing the center of the stage to me. Preston tried to follow me up the stairs, his panic escalating into pure, unfiltered terror. But Malik and the senior auditors immediately formed a physical barrier at the base of the stage. Preston was trapped on the floor, surrounded by the whispers of the Atlanta elite, who were slowly realizing that the golden boy of the tech industry was currently begging for his life. Before I could adjust the microphone and address the highly anticipated corporate merger, a sudden violent commotion erupted from the center aisle. Terrence and Valerie were shoving their way through the crowd of reporters and socialites. My parents had watched the entire exchange unfold. They had seen the supreme deference Mr. Lin showed me. They had seen Preston begging and sweating at my feet. The delusion that had clouded their judgment for decades evaporated in an instant, replaced by a ruthless, opportunistic survival instinct. They realized that Preston's ship was rapidly sinking, and I was the only person in the room commanding a heavily armored yacht. In a display of hypocrisy, so sickening, it practically defied human logic, my parents attempted to rapidly switch sides right in front of the flashing press cameras. Valerie pushed a local business reporter out of her way and rushed to the front of the stage. She had completely abandoned Jada, who was still standing near the ice sculpture, sobbing in humiliated confusion. Valerie slapped a bright, tearful smile onto her face, clasping her hands together in a theatrical display of maternal pride. "That is my daughter," Valerie announced loudly, ensuring her voice carried over the murmurs of the crowd and directly into the nearest microphones. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with fake manufactured joy. "Chloe, darling, we are just so incredibly proud of you. We knew you were running a massive global operation. We have been keeping it a secret to protect your privacy, but we just could not hold it in anymore." Terrence stepped up right beside her, puffing out his chest and adjusting his expensive tuxedo jacket. He turned to the reporters, instantly falling into his booming, authoritative patriarch persona. "My brilliant, successful daughter," Terrence declared, projecting his voice across the ballroom. "I taught her everything she knows about international logistics. She built this corporate intelligence firm from the ground up, and she is the absolute pride of the Hayes family. We are so thrilled she is here to personally oversee this historic merger." I stood at the podium, looking down at the two people who had created me. 2 weeks ago, in a soundproof VIP lounge, Terrence had told me I was a dropout with no future and ordered me to beg Preston for forgiveness. A few days after, Valerie had marched into my downtown loft and threatened to blacklist me from Atlanta high society forever unless I took the blame for Preston's failures. They had both gleefully watched Preston file a lawsuit designed to bankrupt me. They had cheered for my destruction. And now, with the cameras flashing and their social survival on the line, they were desperately trying to rewrite history. They were trying to publicly tether themselves to my success, hoping that my immense wealth and power would shield them from the catastrophic fallout of Preston's imminent arrest. They thought I would play along for the sake of public appearances. They thought the old, deep-rooted obligation to protect the family name would force me to smile and accept their fake praise. I leaned forward, wrapping my hands around the edges of the mahogany podium. I looked directly into the camera lenses of the local news networks, and then I locked eyes with my parents. "I do not know who you are trying to impress," I stated, my voice echoing evenly and mercilessly through the sound system. "But you do not get to claim my success after you spent your entire lives trying to guarantee my failure." Valerie's fake smile froze, her eyes widening in sheer panic as she realized I was not playing the game. Terrence opened his mouth to interrupt to salvage the narrative, but I cut him off instantly. "You drained my college savings to fund a pageant fantasy. You kicked me out when I refused to be your prop. You actively conspired to help a fraudulent man bankrupt my company just so you could keep living in a mansion you can no longer afford." I spoke clearly, ensuring every single word was captured by the press. "You traded a daughter for a fraud, and now you get to keep him." The camera flashes erupted in a blinding, chaotic frenzy. The reporters began shouting questions, the room descending into an absolute frenzy of scandalized shock. Valerie stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth as the reality of her total public rejection set in. Terence stood completely paralyzed, his mouth hanging open, the booming patriarch completely silenced. I had severed the cord completely, leaving them stranded, exposed, and entirely detached from my protection. I did not give them another second of my attention. I turned my back on my parents and faced the massive digital projection screen spanning the wall behind the podium. I reached into my tailored jacket, pulled out my encrypted silver flash drive, and plugged it directly into the presentation console. It was time to show the entire city exactly what kind of man they had been celebrating. I slid the encrypted silver flash drive into the USB port of the master presentation console. The massive digital screens flanking the ballroom instantly flickered. The pretentious gold-leafed logo of Preston's logistics startup vanished. In its place, the stark razor-sharp obsidian emblem of my international holding company illuminated the room. I tapped the microphone twice. The sharp, percussive thuds cut through the chaotic shouting of the reporters and the frantic whispers of the Atlanta elite. Absolute silence fell over the ballroom once again. Everyone stared at me, waiting for the final verdict. I looked directly at Mr. Lin, who stood perfectly still at the front of the stage, his arms crossed over his chest. My voice rang out clear and uncompromising. As the chief North American risk advisor for the Shanghai conglomerate, I am officially denying the authorization of this $500 million merger. I pressed the clicker in my hand. The screen behind me shifted to a dense, heavily highlighted financial ledger. I did not sugarcoat the reality. I announced to the entire room that they were not attending a historic corporate merger. They were attending the public collapse of a massive, sophisticated Ponzi scheme. The collective gasp from the audience was deafening, but I did not stop. I clicked to the next slide, displaying a complex web of offshore routing accounts. I explained that Preston did not possess a revolutionary supply chain algorithm. I pointed to the glowing red figures on the screen, detailing exactly how he had burned through $80 million of domestic venture capital in less than 2 years. My forensic accounting team had breached his servers and traced every single stolen dollar. I exposed the Macau private equity loans he had taken out to fund his luxury lifestyle, his bespoke tuxedos, and the $50,000 engagement dress currently hanging off my sister's trembling frame. Jada let out a shrill, breathless shriek, looking down at her custom-beaded gown as if the fabric had suddenly caught fire. She looked at Preston, her eyes wide with a horrified, dawning realization. The fairy tale she had been bragging about to her bridesmaids was financed by stolen money, and the entire city was currently taking high-definition pictures of her wearing the evidence. She clawed at the heavy, sparkling skirts, hyperventilating, as the illusion of her billionaire status shattered into a million worthless pieces. Preston was pacing erratically at the base of the stage. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting frantically toward the ballroom exits. But the heavy double doors were already blocked by Mr. Lin's massive private security detail. There was absolutely nowhere to run. I clicked the remote again. A new slide appeared displaying high-resolution satellite tracking data and physical shipping manifests. I did not spare my father. I explained that the supposedly groundbreaking logistics software was entirely defunct, a ghost code purchased for pennies, just to look good on a presentation deck. To fake physical movement and trick his initial domestic investors, Preston needed a physical front. He needed empty trucks to drive across state lines so he could log them as fulfilled high-value tech shipments. I pointed directly at Terence, who was practically melting into the patterned carpet. I revealed that my father had willingly provided that front. He had handed over his failing logistics fleet to artificially inflate Preston's corporate value. They had turned our family name into a physical routing hub for federal wire fraud. Terence staggered backward, bumping into a cocktail table and sending a silver tray of champagne glasses crashing to the floor. The sharp, shattering sound punctuated my presentation perfectly. Valerie grabbed his arm, her pristine image completely destroyed as the local business reporters in the front row typed furiously on their phones live, tweeting the absolute destruction of one of Atlanta's most prominent socialite families. They had tried to blacklist me from high society, and I had just handed them a permanent, highly publicized eviction notice. I saved the killing blow for last. I pressed the button one final time. A blown-up image of a highly encrypted internal email filled the 50-foot screen. The timestamp showed it was sent by Preston just 48 hours ago. I read his own words aloud to the room. I read exactly how he planned to use the $500 million capital injection from Mr. Lin to immediately pay off his violent offshore creditors, purposefully leaving the Shanghai conglomerate, holding a completely empty bankrupt shell company. I laid out the undeniable documented proof of felony fraud sealing his fate with his own digital signature. The flashbulbs erupted into a blinding continuous strobe. The noise in the ballroom swelled into a deafening roar of scandal and outrage. The elite guests were shoving each other, holding up their smartphones to capture the damning emails projected on the screen. Investors who had previously backed Preston were screaming into their phones, calling their lawyers and demanding emergency asset freezes. The entire gala had descended into a corporate bloodbath. Mr. Lin turned his head slowly, locking eyes with Preston. The look on the billionaire's face was not just angry, it was lethal. Mr. Lin had been moments away from wiring $500 million to a con artist, and the realization hardened his features into pure, dangerous stone. He gave a single sharp nod to the men standing by the doors. Preston snapped. The polished, arrogant white savior facade completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but the violent desperation of a man who knew he was going to spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. He let out a raw, guttural scream. He lunged forward, scrambling up the carpeted steps of the stage like a rabid dog. His hands were outstretched, his eyes wild and bloodshot, aiming directly for the presentation console to rip the flash drive out and destroy the evidence. I was aiming right for me. I did not flinch. I did not even take a single step back. Before Preston could even bring his foot down on the main platform, a wall of solid muscle intercepted him. Two of Mr. Lin's elite private security guards hit Preston simultaneously from the side. The impact was brutal and completely uncompromising. They slammed the supposed billionaire face first into the polished mahogany desk, pinning his arms violently behind his back. The sound of his jaw cracking against the heavy wood echoed sharply through the open microphone. Preston thrashed and screamed, spitting blood onto the stage, demanding that someone help him, demanding that Terrence do something to stop them. But my father was already gone, paralyzed by the realization that the sirens he would soon hear were coming for him too. The heavy thud of Preston hitting the polished mahogany desk echoed through the ballroom speakers, followed by a sharp gasp from the crowd. He struggled against the two massive security guards, pinning his arms, his custom tuxedo tearing at the shoulder seam. Blood dripped from his lip onto the unsigned merger contracts, staining the thick white paper, a brilliant, condemning red. He looked pathetic, stripped of his arrogant billionaire persona, reduced to a desperate man who realized he had just lost absolutely everything. Mr. Lin stepped up to the microphone, his expression entirely unreadable. He did not look at the bleeding man pinned to his desk. He looked out at the flashing cameras and the stunned audience of Atlanta elites. Based on the irrefutable evidence presented by my chief risk advisor, my conglomerate is officially and permanently withdrawing our $500 million capital investment, Mr. Lin announced, his voice carrying the chilling authority of a corporate executioner. Furthermore, my legal team has already initiated the transfer of this forensic audit to the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We do not tolerate fraud, and we will aggressively cooperate with the authorities to ensure the architects of this criminal enterprise face maximum federal prosecution. The ballroom erupted. The local business reporters surged forward, shoving microphones and recording devices toward the stage, shouting questions over the deafening noise. The investors who had previously bought into Preston's lies were in a state of absolute hysteria. I watched one prominent venture capitalist throw his champagne glass against the wall and scream at his frantic legal team over the phone, demanding they freeze Preston's domestic assets before the federal government seized everything. In the center of the chaotic center aisle, Jada's pristine, $50,000 bridal fantasy violently unraveled. She stood frozen for a long moment, her eyes darting between the projected emails on the massive screen and the bleeding, humiliated man she was supposed to marry in less than 24 hours. The reality finally breached her delusion. She was not marrying a tech billionaire. She was tethered to a broke, desperate felon whose entire life was a fabricated house of cards. Jada let out a piercing, guttural scream that sliced through the noise of the crowd. She lunged forward, her heavy beaded gown tangling around her legs, causing her to stumble and fall hard onto the patterned carpet. She did not bother to gracefully recover. She tore at the tight, restrictive bodice of her dress, her manicured nails ripping the expensive beads and tearing the delicate tulle as if the fabric itself was suffocating her. She screamed at Preston, demanding to know if it was true, demanding to know where her money was, demanding to know how he could embarrass her in front of the entire city. Preston could not even look at her. Pinned to the desk, he squeezed his eyes shut and began to weep loud, ugly sobs of pure defeat. Seeing her golden ticket cry like a broken child, Jada collapsed completely. She curled into a ball on the floor, weeping hysterically into the ruined layers of her stolen dress, mourning the luxury lifestyle that had just evaporated into thin air. No one moved to help her. Her bridesmaids, the women she had spent all evening mocking me to, were already backing away, whispering furiously among themselves, desperately trying to distance their own reputations from the catastrophic scandal unfolding before them. A few feet away, my father Terence was experiencing his own personal apocalypse. He had collapsed heavily into a fragile gilded chair, his large frame looking suddenly hollow and deflated. He was staring blankly at his own hands, his breathing shallow and erratic. Valerie was shaking his shoulder violently, her face a mask of smeared makeup and pure terror. She was demanding that he do something, demanding that he fix the situation, screaming that they were going to lose the country club and the Buckhead mansion. Terence did not look at her. He looked up at the projection screen, reading the exact domestic carrier routing numbers that Preston had used to commit wire fraud. Terence realized with chilling clarity that his own signature was on those routing manifests. He had willingly signed off on empty truck shipments to inflate Preston's value, thinking he was securing his family legacy. Instead, he had handed the federal government undeniable proof of his complicity. His logistics business was not just bankrupt, it was a crime scene. Terence put his head between his knees, utterly paralyzed by the knowledge that the sirens were coming, and they were coming for him. I stood at the podium and surveyed the absolute wreckage of my family. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, invisible, and worthless. They had demanded I sacrifice my dignity to save their fraudulent empire. Now they were drowning in the exact toxic flood they had created, and I felt absolutely no obligation to throw them a life preserver. I reached forward and calmly pulled my encrypted silver flash drive out of the presentation console. The massive projection screen went completely black. I closed my laptop, slid it smoothly into my leather briefcase, and turned my back on the stage. I walked down the steps and into the center aisle. The chaotic, screaming crowd of socialites and reporters instantly parted from me. They moved back, giving me a wide, respectful berth, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. I walked past Jada, who was still sobbing on the floor in her ruined dress. I walked past Valerie, who was frantically trying to pull a hyperventilating Terence out of his chair. I did not pause. I did not look back. I walked straight through the grand double doors and out into the cool, quiet night air, leaving Preston completely cornered by furious creditors and flashing cameras. The immediate aftermath of the gala was swift and absolutely merciless. Over the next 7 days, the news cycle in Atlanta was dominated entirely by the spectacular collapse of Preston's tech logistics startup. Isaiah and Malik provided me with daily morning briefings from the secure confines of my downtown loft, detailing the total destruction of the people who had tried to ruin me. Preston's wedding was canceled before the sun even rose on Saturday morning. By Monday, he was officially indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and conspiracy. The judge denied his bail, citing him as a massive flight risk due to his outstanding debts with violent offshore private equity firms. Jada tried to salvage a tiny fraction of her dignity by attempting to pawn her massive diamond engagement ring, only to face yet another humiliating public breakdown. When the jeweler informed her The stone was a cheap lab-grown cubic zirconia. Preston had not even cared enough to buy her real jewelry. Valerie and Terrence's social and financial annihilation was absolute, with the federal authorities actively seizing Terrence's business assets as evidence in the fraud investigation. The bank immediately moved forward with the foreclosure on their Buckhead mansion. Without my anonymous corporate sponsorship holding up their status, the Atlanta Heritage League formally and publicly expelled them, wiping their names from the high society registry completely. They were forced to pack whatever belongings they could fit into a rented moving truck and relocate to a cramped, cheap apartment on the outskirts of the city. On Wednesday evening, I sat at my glass conference table, finalizing the risk assessment portfolio for my next international client. My secure personal phone buzzed against the table. The screen illuminated, displaying an incoming call from a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a notification popped up. I tapped the screen and listened to the audio message. It was my mother. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all the arrogant, haughty superiority she had weaponized against me for 3 decades. She was sobbing, her words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate plea. "Chloe, please, you have to help us. The feds took the logistics trucks. The bank locked us out of the house today. Jada cannot stop crying. We have absolutely nothing left. We know you have money, Chloe. We know you run that massive company. Please, you are our daughter. You cannot just leave your family on the street. We are so sorry. Just call us back. Please, I am begging you." I sat in the quiet luxury of my penthouse, listening to the desperate voice of the woman who had kicked me out at 18, the woman who had laughed when Preston ordered me to my knees. She was not sorry for how she treated me. She was only sorry that the golden child she chose had turned out to be a fraud, and the scapegoat she discarded had turned out to be the billionaire she desperately needed. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the need to gloat or to call her back and scream or to demand a groveling apology. I simply hovered my finger over the digital trash can icon and deleted the voicemail. I blocked the routing number entirely. I erased their access to my life with one effortless motion. A week later, the humid chaos of Atlanta was thousands of miles behind me. I sat in the plush, oversized leather seat of a first-class private suite on a direct flight to Tokyo. My firm had just secured a massive exclusive intelligence contract with one of the largest tech conglomerates in Japan, and I was flying out to personally oversee the integration. The cabin was completely silent, insulated from the roar of the jet engines outside. A flight attendant silently approached, offering a crystal flute filled with vintage champagne. I accepted the glass with a polite nod, taking a slow, satisfying sip as I looked out the large window. Below me, a thick layer of pristine white clouds stretched out endlessly toward the horizon, glowing brightly under the morning sun. I was 32 years old, completely autonomous, wildly wealthy, and entirely free. I had built an empire from the absolute bottom, utilizing the very resilience my family had tried to crush. I was untouchable, soaring at 30,000 feet, perfectly content to leave the gravity of their toxic world far behind me. Looking back at the absolute wreckage of that night, the greatest lesson I learned was about the true definition of power and family. For 32 years, I was conditioned to believe that my worth was dictated by the approval of people who only felt tall when they forced me to stay small. My parents and my sister built their entire identities on the fragile, desperate illusion of status. They measured human value by exclusive country club memberships and the fleeting opinions of high society. But fake empires always crumble when exposed to the uncompromising light of the truth. Real power is never about wearing a $50,000 bridal gown paid for with stolen venture capital or demanding respect in a language you do not even understand. Real power is the quiet, unbreakable resilience you meticulously build in the dark while everyone else is busy celebrating your supposed failure. I had to lose the biological family I was born into to finally realize I never actually needed them to survive. Blood does not automatically entitle anyone to your hard-earned peace, your financial resources, or your bright future. Healing for me did not mean forgiving their deliberate betrayal or inviting them back to my table. It meant having the absolute, unapologetic courage to lock the door and walk away without a single ounce of guilt or hesitation. When you finally stop twisting yourself into knots to fit into toxic spaces where you are constantly disrespected, you create the necessary room to build a massive, untouchable kingdom of your own. Have you ever had to bravely walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace and establish your true worth? Share your survival story in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your absolute power.